Good morning to everybody. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you to Alam and CM for the organization. Very good organization. I'm a researcher at the Centre d'études et de recherche sur les qualifications, which is a French center for research in work and employment, funded by the French Ministry of Education and the French Ministry of Work and Employment. My title presentation is Taking Account of the Employees' Tacit Knowledge to Green Work Practices. And this presentation is part of a big project, a three-year long-term project on exploration of sustainable development's impact on work, training and employment. It's funded by the CGDD, which is a French agency for sustainable development, which depends on the French Ministry of Ecology. The areas investigated are agriculture, transportation and logistics, eco-activities, construction and energy efficiency, and tourism. We have a report on tourism, so I think if the presentation of the morning, if the researchers, this Greek researcher, read French, it could be interesting to compare her work to our work on tourism. This presentation is based on a long-term study on transportation and logistics, and the purpose of the study was to raise awareness on environmental issues in the French field of freight transportation and logistics. So it's a kind of applied research which is very concrete, and it is centered on work practices, employees' work practices, and we aim to green employees' work practices in the field. It was the interest of French Ministry of Ecology, which has a very close relationship with the industry, and what we call branch, which is the field of freight transportation and logistics. The study was organized on two steps. The first step was, in the first step we aimed to analyze proactive companies committed to best environmental practices, to understand the way sustainable development change their work organization. We choose this methodology because the field of freight transportation and logistics is not very committed with environmental issues, so we choose to analyze proactive companies' work organization and we wanted to disseminate this awareness to other companies and in order to implement a sustainable work organization in the field. The study is mainly a qualitative research from social sciences based on 30 in-depth interviews conducted with research specialists in the field, training specialists, and transportation and supply chain companies. With a colleague, we also conducted a field observation in a training area for supply chain work, and we participated at a local employment skill planning company on freight transportation and logistics. What was the main question of our research? The main question of this applied research is how can the transportation and supply chain companies promote new green practices and organization in the workplace? What are the implementation conditions? And why should companies encourage employee participation in this process? The research is based on the body research of environmental management, environmental citizenship behavior, and top management. I based this presentation mainly of the work of Olivier Boirol from Laval University, which published in the Journal of Business Ethics. The references are in the article in the Outlook. So what's the environmental management? It's generally based on environmental management systems, which is held in large companies since the 19th and 20th century, led by the management team, most of time from environmental units, and it is structured and organized on the basis of performance reports and external audits. Some observers think that it can improve the corporate image, lead to competitive advantage, and that it is sometimes considered as a strategic issue by the companies. But it's discussed. What are the typical profile of companies implementing EMS? There are large internationally established companies, large manufacturers of finished products. And what are the findings that we discuss of the environmental management studies? Researchers find that the manager have a central role in environmental management, that the importance of top management in corporate greening is very, very, very important, and it's the issue that we will discuss. Environmental management is rarely collaborative, and some authors like Murillo Luna, Garces Ariabe, and Rivera Torres highlight that low employee involvement in decision-making is an internal barrier in adopting environmental management practices. So what's our position? We think that the emphasis of a top-down management in EMS can be counterproductive, and this is important to take into account the psychological process of employees' adherence to environmental values. What's our result? Well, the title didn't appear, and it's a pity, but now I will present the results. The proactive transportation companies interviewed generally integrated their environmental action into EMS. Those actions can be to reduce energy consumption, to the waste sourcing, and so on. And those EMS actions, it's our point, were led by top management and supported by training programs like eco-driving courses, waste sourcing training for the warehouse workers, and security and health training, because for companies, security was an important point of sustainable development. We studied those training programs, and we find that they were divided in two types. The values training, which were kinds of ideological or theoretical training on what is sustainable development, what are the values of sustainable development, and a kind of workplace training, which is a more classical training to change work practices. What were the characteristics of those values training? Well, they aim to instill environmental awareness in employees' mind. And they were provided to top and middle management and sometimes to workers. They are very important because they give meaning to the company's environmental actions, and they help to create an energy-saving culture in the firms. But there are some difficulties. Some workers were sometimes reluctant to this kind of training, and what we find is that an excessively top-down approach may create a form of rejection of the company's environmental strategies. And most of the time, those trainings were sometimes too disconnected from the work practices. What do we find as a possible solution is that a way to involve employees in greening the organizational process of a firm may be to have them take part in upgrading, there's a mistake, sorry, their work practices by pooling their informal and tacit knowledge, which is an important point of the organizational citizenship behavior theories, the importance of the informal and tacit knowledge, and it could be done by the trainer with the trainer cooperation during the values training in a form of feedback. So the management board should then take into account all those bottom-up projects to transform the work organization and practices, thing which is not done for now. And as said by an instructor, a majority of good environmental ideas is common sense, and common sense comes from the everyday people. And this is the end. Thank you.
This is the challenge, and this is the right way of doing it, because you're looking at a particular organizations or sectors, industries. I think the challenge facing firms at the moment is how do you cut your cost, but innovate in sustainable development and so on. And I don't think the approach about looking at individual firms, it's about the industry and networking. None of the firms can innovate unless they network with suppliers and the outputs and so on. It's organizations are not producing products on their own. They have raw materials, other materials that comes in from other suppliers. So it's an industry issue. So I think, for instance, when you're looking at cement industry or textile industry, there must be something that the industry is worried. And what are the challenges that firms can cooperate within that industry up to a point before its commercialization? And I think that needs to be explored, and there is quite a lot of industry-wide collaborations that's taken place. Formally, informally, they have meetings, textile manufacturers get together, they understand the challenges, and there's a lot of work being done by industry organizations telling the firms as to which way. I think you need to look at those sectors and try to understand how they network together, because it's not a sort of individual firm challenge that a firm can become sustainable on its own. It's a far more complex problem because they're networking all the time. Their suppliers, customers and supply chains and so on. It has to be industry-wide and network-wise. And then what extent they stop that collaboration then becomes commercial and they all become cost-conscious. So I think from that point of view, it's quite good that they're looking at industries and then trying to understand how firms, using case studies and in-depth interviews, trying to understand the industry problems, because different industries have different constraints. I mean, one of my colleagues is looking at IT technology. The challenge there, they have to cut their cost 30% every year in the United States and innovate. And the industry realized the challenge, and they have to work together to achieve the cost cut 30% every year. That incentivizes them to innovate, because if they don't cut their costs, then the people, consumers will want new changes, and they have to cut the cost. So I think that sort of thing, the approach has to be much more in-depth.
But on the other hand, you know, in industries there are some multinationals, and these are big firms, and they are pioneering some issues about sustainable development. Like Sony is the best example of environmental accounting in Japan, and with the help of Sony's attitudes and behaviors, your point, I mean the Japan's Ministry of Environment and other staffs, other institutions are going to collaborate these kind of issues. So in some cases, some firms, but not the small firms, of course, big firms are pulling these issues on the agenda. So, but you are right on the other hand. So there are two dimensions, actually. One is institutional perspective and industrial collaboration altogether, with the, maybe under the umbrella of associations or other kind of collaborations. But multinationals are important because they are keen on their reputations, their marketing strategies, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
I think I would like to sort of see in both those papers, sorry, both those papers, the macro data as well, right? I mean, for example, every country like France, I mean, European Union, EU, France as well has got some sort of, commitment by 2030 or 2040. I mean, EU is by 2040, you have to bring down 40% of the CO2, 1990 level. So I think if you can look at the industry with that macro data and see where the industry is going. I mean, same as, I don't know whether Turkey has got that any commitment for 2030 or something like that. So since you use this a kind of qualitative study, I think it is important as well to bring in some quantitative stuff and then relate with your qualitative assessment or conclusion or whatever. And in this regard, I have to refer another conference, which is your country is hosting. It's a global conference, which is on our common future under climate change on 7 to 10 July, as you know, in Paris. And fortunately, I would be sort of, presiding one of the parallel sessions. 1,500 people are going there. So I think I will encourage you, it's not commercial, I would encourage you to look at the industry sector in that conference, and then you would be able to find that what other studies are also having globally. Thank you.
I will take it in account, and I will try to assist to the COP conference in December. And it's a point of our project, our big project funded by CGDD, to analyze, to investigate some fields in a quite concrete manner. With a qualitative research field like agriculture, like tourism, and to be more precise in our analysis and more concrete. So thank you very much.
You talk about value-driven training, which is quite interesting, because the danger then is where's propaganda, where's value-driven, but an ordinary training. So I know in the UK, much of the training is because it's statutory, you must do it for health and safety, etc. But do you see, and therefore that's where a lot of the training is actually done, is in the statutory sector, where it's compulsory training. So I just wondered how you would link your value training to the statutory training in order to achieve these goals a bit more effectively.
You asked me if I saw some not compulsory trainings
and it's how to use this opportunity in a way of compulsory training in a way to promote more environmentally
well, those values
activities.
training were compulsory trainings, and that's a problem too, because some workers think that it's the management initiative, the management ID, and so they are not invested in this change. So my solution, well, our solution is to put the tacit knowledge of workers in those values training, because values is a very important point in the change, in the sustainable change, and every worker needs to be invest in this change.
Right, we better stop and move on. This one, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.